You are now entering Nick and Mello's hyperspace.
Hello, I'm Carmelo, and I think what I love most about the Lando comic series by Charles Soule is Lando's reluctance to use blasters. I was intrigued by that.
I'm Nick, and I think my favorite thing about the Lando miniseries by Charles Soule is the his relationship with Lobot and how that influences him
Mm.
going forward.
In our journey through hyperspace, we examine everything and anything Star Wars from the point of view of two lifelong fans, one young, one old, who came together through the will of the Force.
And in this episode, Carmelo and I are going to be talking about one of my favorite comics and one of my favorite stories in all of Star Wars, the 2015 miniseries called just Lando, about the man himself, Lando Calrissian. Give a little brief backstory about when this was written and when it takes place in the Star Wars timeline. This came out 2015, not long after they had decided to reset the canon for Star Wars, and so this was one of their early kind of stories. And they did a lot of these stories at the time. We did one on Leia. We talked about that in our Leia episode. They did one on Chewbacca and Han Solo. Everybody, pretty much all the main characters got like a little mini series just to kind of, I guess, get people that are familiar with the originals and the films to kind of ease them into comics. And a lot of these comics were done by veterans of Marvel Comics. So Mark Waid did Princess Leia, and he's been a writer for Marvel and DC for a number of years. I think Greg Rucka
Oh,
did.
I did not know that. Interesting.
Yeah, Greg Rucka, I believe, did the Han Solo
The
series,
Han Solo.
and Jerry Duggan, he did the Chewbacca series, and then Charles Soule, he did this series, and this is his first Star Wars work actually, and this kind of was his getting his feet wet, and it kind of obviously he's the biggest writer in Star Wars comics right now, and I think a lot of at this time they were probably just experimenting who's got a good voice for Star Wars, and then maybe he won the little lottery there and became the writer of all these Star Wars comics later. But
It
yeah,
is, it is, it was fun to read this sort of knowing Charles Soule so well by now. But it
right.
was fun being there at the very beginning, like going back to like his first Star Wars comic.
Yeah, and planting a lot of seeds for things to come, which we'll talk about later. I
Yes,
remembered a lot of
yes.
things. It's been a few years since I read this, but I remember a lot of things in this comic. I'm like, oh yeah, that shows up later in this. This takes place years before New Hope, so this is before he runs Cloud City. Pretty sure at the time of this comic, Solo wasn't a thing, the movie Solo, but I'm pretty sure it takes place after Solo because he does not have the Millennium Falcon in the story. So I'm assuming it takes place
Right.
after Solo. We were also just a warning for everyone. This comic is 8 years old now, going on 9. I'm not saying you should have read it by now, but for us to really talk about it, it's 5 issues. Kind of hard to like skate around without spoilers, so we're going to spoil it. If you don't want to be spoiled, here's your warning. Come back later when you've read it because it's excellent. I guess Carmelo will talk to you first. Why was your favorite part of the story Lando's reluctancy to use blasters?
I just had not realized that that was a thing, that Lando found other ways of getting through life without using a gun, without using a blaster. Han Solo is, when people cosplay Han Solo has to have a gun. He has to have a blaster.
Oh yeah,
And so it's really interesting that Lando, through the story here, he's something that he's sort of constantly saying he's not using, and it's really interesting because at the end he does use it, sort of saying, well, if you say you do use it, then people expect you to, but
right.
if you say you don't ever use it, then
They're
when
gonna
you
get
do
caught off
use it,
guard.
it's an actual surprise.
Yeah,
And it works really, really, really well. But it was just really interesting that Lando, for me, has always been a very sort of crafty character. And this sort of added to it the fact that he didn't need to use the typical Star Wars violence of just using the blaster, but that he used other ways of sometimes getting away with anything, with murder,
yeah.
in order to get what he wants. He's a gambler that doesn't need the gun because he can use other things
Mhm.
to make it work. I have a question for you before
Sure,
we keep going, because you adore Lando.
that I do.
And it's just like, what it's audience, this is like a recurrent theme of Nick saying how much he loves Lando.
Do.
And I think it would be really nice before we like dig into the comics, if you could talk a little bit about what are the things that you find so fascinating and so intriguing about him.
Sure. Yeah. So for the audience, I've been trying to get Carmelo to do an episode on this comic specifically for like 2 years. I've been saying we should do an episode on this, and Carmelo was always like, "Oh, I didn't love it, but it was okay." So I finally talked him into it, and I'm glad he did because it was fun for me revisiting it. But for Lando himself as a character, I've always found him fascinating. As like you said earlier, he's very good at charming his way out of situations, charming people.
Mm,
He's an influencer, and a really highlight of the story for me was his buddy Lobot with the implants. For those of you that don't know, he's mentions that to Lando, like you have such this charisma and charm, and you know how to get people behind you, and you really could use that talent for something useful one day. And I've always
right.
found that fascinating about Lando is he's one of those guys that you root for, and you kind of know he's going to screw up or get himself in a bad situation, but he's just entertaining as hell to me. Um, I just really enjoy him. I don't know. And
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
Billy D. Williams is one of the coolest people that ever lived. I just think
He's pretty wonderful. I mean,
he's a great guy. Uh, I mean, he's just very smooth.
that actor works so well for Lando, and it's just really interesting. It's very interesting how characters like Leia and Han and Lando are sort of creations of the actors themselves.
Yeah,
I'm going to, I hope nobody murders me by saying this, but there's a little less of Mark Hamill in Luke Skywalker. There's a lot of Billy D. Williams in Lando.
I agree.
I love that fusion of the kind of actor that Billy D. Williams is with the kind of character that Lando is. And then we sort of run through it in the movies and then this comic series I enjoyed it very much. This is the second time I read it.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it much more this time. The first time I was sort of like, I don't know what this is. This is a little more. I think because I knew what I was getting into.
Yeah. One thing I really should have mentioned up top, I just thought of it now. Since the acquisition, Disney has, I think, done a really good job, and we talked about it before, is like introducing characters of color, introducing new gender and sexuality to the Star Wars universe that we
Right,
didn't really get in the
right,
previous 6 films or Clone Wars. Lando is one of the few minority characters from pre-Disney that really had a prominent role, and
right.
he also now I think he's probably one of the more prominent LGBTQ characters, him
Mm-hmm,
being pansexual. Um,
mm-hmm.
and Billy D. Williams is a big supporter of that, so don't hate me for saying that. But I find that fascinating too, and Lando's really not on screen a whole lot in the original trilogy. I think it's like less than 20 minutes, but I really love him in pretty much everything he's been into in this Disney era with the comics he's in and the few novels he showed up in. He's been fantastic to me.
So, Nick, can you give us a brief synopsis of the comic so we can then sort of dig into the scenes and the characters and all of that?
Sure. Pretty much it's a classic Lando story. Beginning, he gets himself into a big mess. He's in debt to someone and he's trying to get out of debt. He scores big. He gets a small win at the beginning. We think he's going to get out of it. Then the person he owes him debts to says, "Never mind. You actually have to do one more job for me." And it's always
Mhm.
that trope of a heist movie or heist episode in a show. It's one last job.
Right.
Lando and Lobot go with some other characters that are hired from I think he's like a crime lord. I don't remember who he is exactly. No, he's
Yeah.
not very important to the story, but to steal some artifacts from a unguarded yacht, and it's made it seem like an easy score. And then, of course, we find out it's not an easy score. It's actually probably the most dangerous score Lando will ever get involved in. And it's very fascinating. I read this to my wife actually, and after the first issue, they reveal who it is. I'm going to spoil it for you guys, but into the first issue, you realize that this uncharted yacht that has all these valuable artifacts actually owned by Palpatine himself. So it is a. My wife was like shocked. She's like, "Oh, this is not going to be easy." He thought that was a good twist, and basically gets himself into a mess and has to get out of it. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the way, but you had questions, so we'll kind of dive into it and talk more about it. But that's the gist of the setup of the story.
No, and part of my question was this. It's really interesting because we get into that yacht and there are all these like dark side objects in it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the objects in here is a mask that is going to be really important in another series in the Soul Vader series. And so it's really interesting how this comic is sort of dropping something that Palpatine has, but it is something that becomes really important in another series that the same writer does. And that's really interesting. The bridging that happens between a Charles Soule Lando and a Charles Soule Vader, with this sort of dark side mask. Is it a helmet?
I think it's more of a helmet kind of thing.
It's a helmet, yeah. And so that's one of the things that's sort of like, is this typical of comics, of
It is
like
very
bridging
typical.
from one object, from one story to another?
It is very typical.
Okay,
Star Wars does a really good job of that, especially between writers. Ethan Sachs and I talked. He's done this before in his series. Charles Soule is very famous for this, and it's very common. It happens in the other
okay,
comics as well. But yeah, very common for authors to drop characters. There's a character in this story who you and I were talking before we recorded. We recognized the name, but she shows up in other comic series later, and
right,
that's how we
right,
recognized her. This was her first
right,
appearance.
right.
Yeah, there's that happens all the time in comics.
Okay, okay. Because that was one of the things that are like, oh, wait a minute, I
Yeah,
know that helmet.
yes.
I know that helmet.
And
Um,
I'd forgotten it was in here until I read it again. I was like, oh yeah, that shows up.
and it's interesting because that happens in the movies too.
Yeah,
They're constantly sort of crossing references from one thing to the other.
or the animated shows do a very good job of that
Or the
too.
animated shows, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
And so it seems to be a Star Wars thing in general,
yeah.
of making all those references from one thing to the other.
The mask you were talking about, the mask of Lord Momin, the Sith Lord,
Mhm.
ancient Sith Lord. That series takes place right after Revenge of the Sith, and this takes place, like I said, right around New Hope. So I don't recall. It's been a while since I read those comics. I don't remember what happened to that mask. So somehow
Okay,
Palpatine ended up with it on the yacht. I'm sure there's an explanation or a hint at what happened to it, but this was written before the Vader series. So
right,
the Charles
right,
Soule, I don't know if he just thought of like, oh, that'd be fun to bring back, or if he actually had a game plan of something like I'm going to use
right.
this. I'm sure he had some idea if he ever got the opportunity.
You mentioned at the beginning the relationship between Lando and Lobot, and I
Yeah,
thought that was just beautiful. It was just
yeah,
so, this sort of buddy bromance, no sexual overtones or anything, but it was just such a nice camaraderie,
right,
between them. And it's really nice to have that sort of male comradeship,
hmm,
in Star Wars, without any kind of toxic element to it,
right.
which I found very refreshing. And it is one of the refreshing things that I like about newer comics, because I've been reading some of the older comics, and I'm like, oh my God, this is all tits and ass. It's all tits and ass.
Very
And
graphic.
I'm like, okay, this is like geared towards straight boys.
Teenage
Um,
boys. Yeah,
right. But this one, it doesn't do that. And I really like that. It's not afraid of portraying the sexuality, because there are relationships that Lando has with women in the story, but the Lobot Lando relationship I found really quite beautiful, and a sort of a nice example of masculinity that is not toxic. That there is a beautiful friendship between the two of them.
I like when Star Wars does this so much. Is there's a character in the background of a movie who we know nothing about, who barely has a line or may not even speak at all, and then we
Right,
get him or that character involved in this comic series or a novel, and we learn so much more about them, and then we see them on screen. It's like, oh man, I feel like I have a knowledge of who this character is or some kind of relationship
yes,
with this character. And Star
yes.
Wars does that better than anything, I believe. But
Who?
yeah, no, Star Wars, I think they do this better than
Oh,
anybody.
Star Wars.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, Star
yeah,
Wars in
yeah.
general, I think they do great at this. But yeah, I just really enjoy, like you said, we have a lot of people talk about Finn and Poe. They have a good relationship, but there's some people that ship them, and there's some sexual undertones there, especially in some of the novels. And you have Han and Luke, but it's more of like a big brother, little brother kind
Yeah.
of relationship. This is more of like a best friend. We're in this
Yes.
together. It's very nice.
Yes.
We don't get that often in Star Wars. I really enjoy that this story exists, and then in the current Star Wars comics we're getting from Charles Soule, he's really kind of following up with Lobot and Lando's relationship post Empire. So we're getting to see how it's evolved and where it currently sits. And I just really enjoy that too. It's kind of a nice little
Yeah,
sequel.
I think I just read those and I really enjoyed them.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Star Wars series that is after Empire, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
one, yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah.
current one. Yeah,
The current
it's
one.
really cool. I really love their dynamic and kind of a different time period and a different point in their life. And I think now it kind of puts context of at the end of the story. We'll jump ahead a little bit, but at the end of the story, we get a nice little kind of a sacrifice from Lobot, and it kind of
Mm.
informs why Lando is indebted to him and why Lando has him around on Cloud City. And I realized I watched Empire recently, and he doesn't speak, and I think this comic kind of informs this is why he doesn't speak due to his sacrifice with the implants and stuff. And it's really beautiful because he has some really nice words for Lando, and it kind of informs who Lando is going to be, the kind of man he's going to be in the future, and
Right,
helps him become a hero of the rebellion. So
right, right.
nice when that happens. They all kind of connect like that.
It's really interesting when I teach my Star Wars class. I require all the students to write an essay on a comic series of their choice, and this is one that they use a lot. And every semester I get 4, 5, 6 different papers on them, and they're just wonderful. It's just really fun to see the younger generations enjoying this comic so much.
And I think if you look a lot of different websites that rank them and rank the comics, this one's usually right up there with some of the best Star Wars comics of the new era. So
Oh, really?
a lot of people
Okay.
really love it. It's universally loved, and I think really the popularity of this series is why Charles Soule became one of the big writers on Star Wars.
I love how, I don't know how to say this, fast paced. Like it's one of these comics. Like
It just keeps going.
it just keeps going.
Yeah, it
It
feels
just
like
keeps going.
it feels like an action movie a lot of the time. Like a
Mhm.
heist movie, like I
Mhm.
mentioned earlier.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a
yeah,
time
yeah.
crunch and you have to hurry, and yeah, it does a really good job. The art is absolutely great for me. Um, I really love Alex Malev. For those of you who don't know, he's a his big fame was Daredevil back in the early 2000s, which is funny because Charles Soule also wrote Daredevil much later. So that's just a fun little connection
Oh,
for.
interesting. Uh-huh.
I'm a big Daredevil buff, so that's a fun little connection for me. But yeah, the art's great, the coloring, and it just all kind of it's dark a lot of the issues because they are in space, but you really feel the sense of urgency when it's dark and kind of how the colors feel muted a little bit in some areas.
I think it's one of the most beautiful ones I have read recently.
Yeah,
The look of it is just great. There is an Ugnaught in here.
a she.
I'm looking. What is his name?
It's a she actually.
Oh, it's a she. That's right.
Yeah, because
That's
that caught me
right.
off guard when I was rereading and I forgot. I don't remember her name, but I don't think we've really
I'm
gotten any.
looking. I'm trying to look for. But I loved her. I thought
Uh,
it was just really a wonderful character. Sava Korin.
Savacorn. Yep, that's it.
I think she was my favorite character in the story.
Yeah, I
I was surprised how much I enjoyed her. The first time I read it, she read as just one more character, but this second time, she really made an impression on me. And it's just really interesting how Ugnaughts have slowly entered the
they're
world of Star Wars
becoming more
with
common.
the Mandalorian and with her. It's just it's a race that has been there once again since Empire Strikes Back,
Hmm.
but it is not. They haven't been characters for a very long time.
Right,
And with the Disney era, they have been sort of slowly becoming a
expanding them.
species,
Yeah,
right? And so that's but that character in this story was just beautiful. I really liked her. I really liked her.
two things I really
Sorry for
liked.
changing the pronoun of the character.
That's
I
okay.
forgot.
That's okay. I think two things I really liked is one, the female Ugnaught, which we've never really seen before. I think
Right?
that was kind of a nice twist. And two, that she is a former professor at a university that studied Jedi
Yes.
artifacts. So,
Yes.
who turned to a life of crime after Palpatine kind of got rid of all Jedi history. So,
Right.
that's a fascinating angle. I would love to learn more of her backstory.
Do you know if the I'm going to call it the Black Panther twins, those two?
Yeah,
Do they ever show up anywhere else?
I've never seen them anywhere else. And to me,
Okay.
that's if I have one complaint about this story, those characters do not really feel like they fit in Star Wars for me. They feel very
Yeah,
out of
I agree.
place.
I
They
agree.
feel I kept thinking of like Black Panther, like T'Challa, like
Me too. Me too.
and
I like their function in the story. They work really well as assassins. Their species was sort of like very odd to me.
yeah.
As odd as there's that bunny that is a character
Oh,
in Star Wars.
Jackson, the
It's
green
just
one.
like no, 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 no,
Uh,
no.
it feels very
People like
like
retconning the sequel trilogy. I'm retconning the rabbit. Oh, it just
it's it's kind of like kind of
like
things you think of like Guardians of the Galaxy or something, the
yeah, yeah,
those
yeah,
hybrid
yeah.
people animal things. It kind of was
So
made
I
me think.
like them. I like them as characters as in the way that they functioned. I just didn't
Their design.
their characterization, who they are, species wise. It felt very very out of place to me.
I
I
love
got
the
to take off
covers,
my.
all
Oh,
the
all the
covers
covers
too.
are amazing.
Yeah,
All the covers are amazing.
it's Phil Noto, so of course they're amazing. So, but I want to show
Yeah,
people.
he's becoming a favorite of mine.
Let me find my favorite because
This one
I
is
just
one I love.
that's a good one.
Yeah.
Here's my favorite personally.
Oh, that's pretty
That's just
wonderful.
a great cover. I don't know why I love it so much. It just
And look,
doesn't really
the
fit.
new the new couple.
That's a good one too.
Yes,
It's a good one.
I like that he's sitting on the emperor's seat.
Oh, I take that back. That is not Phil Noto. That is actually Alex Maleev. Okay, I take that back.
Oh, okay.
I take that back.
Well, he's pretty wonderful. Does
Yeah,
he has he done any other Star Wars?
I feel like he has. I know I've
Okay,
seen him somewhere. I want to say
okay.
maybe the Obi-Wan or the Yoda series. I think he did something, or maybe the Han Solo series. He did
Oh,
something.
really?
He did the Han Solo
Okay,
series. That's right.
okay,
The
okay.
the one Han Solo and
The
Chewbacca.
the latest one.
Yes, the one that came I think last year
Okay,
or so. Yeah, that's the
okay.
one he did. I
I
remember.
haven't read them. I just got them, but I haven't read them yet.
Yeah, I think he did some covers for that one. I don't know if he did the inside art, but he did the covers for sure. So yeah, I think it's really all we have to say about it. I just wanted to dedicate an episode to this wonderful comic that I really enjoy, and I'm glad I was able to convince you to read it again. Uh, we I've really been looking forward to it, and I suggest if you're really wanting to jump into Star Wars comics, you've not really had a chance to or know where to start. This is a perfect place to start. You really don't have to read anything else. You can just jump right in. It's a quick little Lando story, and it's really one of the best characterizations I think of Lando outside of the films. So
And
I
you're
recommend.
right. It is nice. It is nice because it's a self-contained story.
Right,
It's
which
not one of these comics where you're like need to know this and need to know that before you get it.
right, and
And so that's quite lovely.
well, earlier we talked. It does plant seeds for other comic series and other characters show up in other spots, but you don't have to know that. You could just enjoy the story, and it does influence kind of like I said earlier, Lando's character in the original trilogy. But other than that, you really don't need to see or you
Right.
know dive into the other comics. You just read this one and have fun.
Well, thank you for making me read this twice.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed it.
I
I hope the
did.
audience
I
picks it
did.
up.
Yes, I think it's quite wonderful. It's
That's
quite
good.
wonderful.
Let
So
us, if you've read this and you're listening, let us know in the comments your thoughts and what you liked about this comic. I'd love to hear other people talk
absolutely.
about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, audience.
Thank you,
May the
guys.
force be with you.